Hi, my name is Paul Beck. This recording relates to the SPRetreat retreat held in London in May 2011 and specifically looks at building SharePoint solutions using Link to SharePoint. Let's have a look at the final product. So you can go and download all of the source code to this, and the URL is shown on the screen. And included on this post is two Visual Studio projects. The first project goes and creates a list and creates referential integrity using a feature receiver between these two lists. And the second part of the project is the visual web part, which you can see on the screen. This is actually a sandbox solution. And in that, we just go and create a drop-down list. We can read the orders for a specific customer, and you can go and delete a specific customer. So it just goes and does your basic CRUD operations. So as you can see in this solution, we have two lists. We have a customers list, and we have an orders list. And the orders are related to the customers in a one-to-many relationship. And the screen shows the crowfoot that shows you that an order always has at least one customer. Now we're going to take a look at Link to SharePoint. This is also known as Splink or SPMetal. First of all, I'm going to just start with Link, which is your language integration query. This really maps your object-oriented code to a specific data source. You don't need to know what the data source is. Just as long as it implements the link provider, you can access it uniformly from within your C# code. All link is standard and you don't need to relearn it, and this will actually tell you that your fields are correct at compile time, and it will give you IntelliSense, so you don't need to know the names of the fields. So if you were doing link to SQL, you would need to know the name of the columns if you were patching together queries. So Link to SharePoint is just the implementation of Link for SharePoint. It's new in 2010. In 2007 it was a Codeplex project which only really allowed you to read data. Now you can do your full set of CRUD operations, so you can read, write, delete and update as you need to. And I'm going to actually start at the bottom of the slide and work my way up, because I like to think of my database as really my starting point. So my data source here is my list. So I've got a SharePoint list. And on top of that, you use the server object model and you use Camel to query your lists. Nothing new here, same as in MOS. However, now you build a proxy on top of this whole stack, which is your link to SharePoint, and you use the SPMetal tool, and this creates you the proxy code, which will actually in turn be converted into Camel and perform your query for you. And this is pretty useful because obviously originally we used to use U2U and it was quite hard to string together Camel queries. Now it's at compile time, it actually checks that the fields that you're requesting exist. So it's a lot safer and you don't spend so much time debugging with very little information. And obviously Camel is extremely difficult to write by hand. So hence we did use the U2U tool, or still do use it. But you've got this link to SharePoint now, which makes that layer abstracts that layer and makes it a lot easier to use. You can always also go and write out your Camel query and do it directly, which would save you a little bit of time. So if you ever did have a query that you're doing a lot and really had to be optimized, you could always pull out this abstracted layer. Link syntax is pretty straightforward. It's kind of like T-SQL if you don't know Link. You can use lambda expressions. I suggest you don't use lambda expressions. However, you can use lambda and do what you want. And the real advantage to using this link is it's now all strongly typed, and hence you get IntelliSense as well. Now we're going to take a look at the SPMetal tool that actually ships with SharePoint 2010. This can be found in the 14 Hive under the bin directory. You run this from your command prompt and it will go and generate you the C# or VB code that you want. The syntax shown there has various extensions that you can add to it, such as a parameters file. You can see the switch there for web, and that is your site collection. And the code, you can just give your code a file name and either tell it CS or VB, and it will generate the code for you. By default, the two hidden fields that are generated using SPMetal are your ID and your version. You also only generate the SharePoint Foundation site columns. It won't generate the standard or enterprise edition site columns or any customized site columns that you add to your code. You can't change this in the parameters file. You can also use CKSDev for generating your link to SharePoint. which helps if you need to generate it quickly and include it inside your source control. Couple of pointers for link to SharePoint, just so you're aware. You'll often see an error saying inefficient queries. You often can just add a to list, and this will actually make your query be broken up into two separate requests, and it will work, and then you can use linked objects to bind it all together again. If you want to use other hidden fields that aren't shown by default, so the default ones are the ID and the version, you can use the parameters file, and you can customize this so you can decide what lists are included, but this parameters file is pretty useful. Obviously, as mentioned before, you only get the SharePoint 2010 Foundation fields. You don't get any custom site columns. You also don't get attachments. Manage metadata obviously comes in the standard edition, also all the publishing fields. However, you can use the interface iCustom mapping to hook this on to sort of extend this API, and then it looks seamlessly as though all of your columns are actually included with SPMetal. You can't cross site collections. Obviously, you can't use external content types. The data is not in SharePoint. So those are really just like the quick pointers I want to give you to link to SharePoint if you haven't used it before. In the next 3 slides, I'm just going to look at your basic CRUD operation. So in this slide, I'm looking at a select and an update. So in this, I've got a button click event, and the first thing I need to do is get up my data context. This is just my proxy code and call it. I'm then going and querying my customers. I'm then going and performing some link query language to go and select a specific customer based on the customer ID. So you can, if you look at that, it's quite similar to T-SQL. And you can quite easily just use Lambda expressions here if you want, and that's just really using delegates to go and perform your logic for you. And then lastly there, I'm just going and taking the customer object that I've pulled back, and I'm amending its title slightly, and then I'm submitting the change, and that would update my record. In this example, I'm once again in the event handler. I'm just going and getting my data context. I'm going and creating a new customer. As you can see, there are choice fields, industry and priority. And priority has a funny 0 behind it, and that's because I have 2 site columns in various lists that I'm using. With the field type of priority or site column of priority, so it just starts appending integers after them, so it'll be 1, 2, 3 as you go along. And you can see I go and insert the change, and I submit my changes there, so it's all pretty straightforward. There's nothing amazing once you've got your proxy up and running. And here's a delete operation. So once again, I'm just going and getting a select and finding the single item that I want, and then I'm just telling it to go and actually delete this customer record. So those are your 4 CRUD operations in its simplest form. As previously discussed, your link to SharePoint code is actually comes down and is put into camel code. You often want to have a look at this code, so you can just log it directly from your data context here out to your file system. This example that I've given you wouldn't work in a sandbox solution because obviously you can't access local resources in this manner, but you could write a full trust proxy and write it out somewhere like that. So you can see that's sort of the camel query that gets generated at the end of the day, and you could put this against an SP query object, and using your server-side object model, you could go and just use the normal camel that's generated. So what I'm doing here is I'm just implementing the iCustom mapping interface, and this is on suppliers items. So this was a custom site column that I created, and I just need to go and map the code, and these are the 3 methods that I need to map. So it's map from, map to, and resolve. You don't have to map the resolve, however you can get locks, so it's a good idea to do the resolve. And obviously the map from is your read object, and the map to is your update object. So if you're doing a read-only object, you only actually need a map from. So here's an example of a custom site column using the iCustom mapping interface. So you can see I've got a phone number, and you can have multiple of them, and as it's a partial class, it's implemented as a partial class. If you have multiple fields, you actually implement them in the same partial class. You can't obviously map from multiple times in a partial class. So here's an example of some code. Go through it if you ever want to do a custom site column. There's a few posts out there, including on my blog. So thanks a lot. A couple of references and guys I've just been watching in this space and having decent posts are the guys here. And obviously you can follow my blog and just check that you've got, if there's any information you need on link to SharePoint.